As Gemini's relationship deepens with the blood alpha, Layton, can she uncover the mysteries of his dark past? When an innocent human is found dead on their territory, how will the couple deal with the ensuing police investigation and the community's suspicions? Join our pack. Subscribe to start your adventure. Chapter 11. His lips were sweet, yet bitter at the same time. The way they fitted with mine, it felt almost like they were made to slot together. The kiss started out soft, Layton simply placing his lips on top of mine. He was being gentle, he was testing the waters. If I were to pull away, so would he. But I didn't pull away, instead I deepened the kiss. I threw my arms around his neck, stretching up to get closer to him. Layton scrunched down slightly so we could get closer. His hand tightened their grip on my hips, his fingers deepening their pressure. I pressed my lips hard against Layton's, telling him I wanted the kiss to continue. The speed of the kiss sped up, as did my heart rate. Taking the kiss a step further, Layton's tongue parted my lips and made its way into my mouth, exploring the unexplored territory. I wasn't sure how long we were kissing for, I lost track of time. Kissing Layton awakened a desire I had not felt before, and when my lips were connected to Layton, nothing else but that desire mattered. Tingles spread over my body, before festering inside my stomach, reminding me that I was real, and the kiss was real. It was only as I began to get lightheaded that I knew I needed to pull away. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. I pulled away and my eyes reopened. I looked up at Layton, both of were gasping for breath. Layton frowned at me, not liking that I had broken the kiss. I had to breathe some time, I giggled, smiling up at him. Layton smiled again, that beautiful, rare grin that was as beautiful as a new dawn or a sunrise. It was something I wanted to see every morning, and one I wanted to fall asleep thinking about. Layton was about to say something when a loud beeping interrupted him. The loud noise made me jump in shock, and it took me a few seconds to realize what it was. The smoke alarm, the breakfast was burning. Oh no, I muttered before I took everything off heat and tried to stop the fire in the sizzling pan. When I'd sorted everything out, I turned back to Layton, who was watching. I think breakfast in bed is ruined, I said. Layton smirked softly. I don't care about the breakfast, I just want to go back to bed. He walked over to me before slipping his arms around my waist. I smiled up at him but blushed slightly. Come, he whispered huskily. Leaning down, he pressed a soft kiss to my lips, a small peck that lasted a few seconds. Then he pulled away and took my hand. Layton led me upstairs, his hand gripping on mine tightly. I was both nervous and excited. In our bedroom, Layton sat down on the bed before pulling me close. I stumbled slightly, but allowed him to maneuver me onto his lap. I sat in a straddling position. His large, firm hands gripped my face, bringing our lips back together. The kiss was long and passionate, and I found my body automatically responding to Layton. His hand ran down my side, and my skin seared with heat. He shifted his weight, and I pressed my body firmed into his. After a few minutes of deep, intimate kisses, Layton's lips moved away from mine. He trailed his kisses over my jawline and down my neck. He left intense, wet kisses over my nape, occasionally letting his teeth nip at the skin of my throat. Layton pulled away after a while and began to kiss my lips again. As he did so, he wrapped his arms around me and lifted me slightly. I gasped in shock at the sudden movement as he placed me down on the bed and hovered his body over mine. His lips never once left mine. As his kisses deepened, he began to run his hands up my side. The movement caused my shirt to raise slightly. I shivered as our skin touched. When the kisses weren't enough to satisfy either of us, Layton pulled back and gripped my shirt. My hands were shaking and I was beyond nervous. Layton, I said, voice shaking. My mate just gave me a large smile, before pressing another kiss to my lips. Then, he slowly, painfully so, removed my shirt. One by one, Layton took off each item of my clothing until I lay naked under him. I was breathing hard, chest rising and falling quickly as Layton studied me. Being wolf meant I spent a lot of time being naked on full moons. So wolves never had an issue with nudity. Yet, under Layton's scrutinizing eyes, I felt more self-aware of my nude body than ever before. So, to move the process along, I began to pull at Layton's shirt. He understood, and began to undress himself. The entire process of making love to Layton was fast, as if it all went past in a quick blur. It hurt at first, but then became more pleasurable the more he carried on. He almost lost control halfway through, becoming more animal than man, and was going a lot faster than felt right. As soon as he heard my yelp of pain, he regained his control and slowed it all down again. However, it wasn't long before we both reached our climaxes. It wasn't as I expected, but I enjoyed it more than I anticipated. When it was all over, I lay with Layton. My head rested on his chest as he held me close. There was a heavy silence between us both, before I ran my eyes over his muscled chest. It was large and perfectly toned in all the right places. The sweat on it made it glitter in the morning bedroom light. However, there was a long intruded scar down the left-hand side of his stomach. It was obviously old, but it looked like it must have been a serious accident that gave it to him. I ran my finger over it. Layton glanced at my fingers. I got that when I was 16, he told me, and I looked up into his bright eyes. My father gave it to me. Your father. I breathed out, shocked how any parent could hurt their child. Layton looked at me for a few seconds, before he bent down and pressed a small kiss to my lips. I have a dark past, Gemini. Too darker than I'd like to admit. One day I'll tell you about it, but not right now. Let's not ruin a great morning with stories of my past. I nodded, offering him a small smile, before leaning my head down on his chest once more. Aimlessly, Layton's fingers played with my hair, twisting and spinning my blonde strands around his index. It felt so nice to lay with him like that, so intimate and natural. I don't want to go into work, Layton sighed. Then don't, I replied, giggling slightly. He chuckled with me, as I turned so I was leaning on his chest, eyes meeting his. I have to. I have way too much to do. I shouldn't really have taken the morning off. But I'm glad I did. He smiled brightly again. I couldn't believe how amazing his smile was, and how much he had shown it to me over that morning. You should smile more often, I commented, smiling myself. Layton just leaned down and pecked my lips once more. I'm going for a shower. Then I'll have to go into the office, he told me. Layton gave me one last kiss, before getting out the bed and heading into the bathroom. I stayed in bed, as the water sounded in the en-suite. When Layton exited the bathroom, he had a towel wrapped around his waist and his body was glistening with water droplets. I stayed silent as Layton went to his closet and picked his outfit. I silently watched him dress, thinking how mundane our lives were. Before he left, Layton gave me another kiss and smile. I'll be back later, don't cook anything, I'll take you out, I also have some things I need to get you to do. Can I have your phone? I asked, sitting up in the bed holding the covers around my naked body. Layton paused in the doorway, looking at me with suspicion. What for? He demanded. I want to call my family. I haven't spoken to them since before the mating ritual. There was a moment of silence before Layton handed me his mobile. I thanked him and he nodded at me. Once he left, I showered and got changed before making some breakfast. I felt bad that Layton didn't get any breakfast, but then I had a feeling he preferred the mating. I giggled out loud as I looked over the burnt pans of food. After lunch, I called home, anxiously listening to the dialing tone. When I heard my mother answer, I wasn't sure if I should have been relieved or nervous. Hello. She chippered. It's me, Gemini. Gemini, oh my gosh, she exclaimed. I heard you got chosen by the Blood Alpha. Honey, is that true? Oh my gosh, does he beat you? Does he force you? Mom, stop, I cut her rambling off. I didn't like the way she spoke about Layton, making him out to be evil and abusive. Layton isn't like that, he's my mate. He cares about me. My mother scoffed, he's a killer, Gemini. Don't let him fool you, he's a murderer, a life ender. Don't think I haven't heard about him killing his own parents. Only a true monster could do that. You don't know him, I snapped. It wasn't often I fought with my mother, or so much as disagreed with her. But I just didn't like the way she spoke about Layton. He wasn't a monster, I knew him, and he wasn't a monster. Honey, you don't know him either. You've known him, what, 2.5 weeks? He's manipulating you, making you think he's this sweet, innocent mate. But he's not, he has killed people, Gemini. Murdered them. You are trying to see the best in someone who has no best. I have no illusions on who Layton is or what he's done. But that doesn't mean he doesn't care for me or his pack. My voice was harsh and static, I hadn't talked to anyone like that before. He's my chosen mate, I thought you'd be happy for me. There was a long pause from my mother. If I couldn't hear her breathing, I would have thought she'd hung up on me. You're blinded, Gemini. You've fallen in love with a monster, and he is poisoning your mind. Please don't call this number again. I don't want to be associated to the Blood Alpha and the things he's done." Then she hung up. When Layton returned later that night, I was ready to go out. I wore a knee-length peach dress which puffed out in a petticoat style. "You look beautiful." Layton nodded his approval, pressing a soft kiss to my painted pink lips. He quickly changed before joining me. He wore a smart, obviously expensive black suit. I was surprised at how nice he looked in it. He always wore something smart, but he looked model-like in his suit. "Stop smelling of desire, or I won't let you leave this house," he warned me seriously. I blushed and turned away. "Are we going somewhere posh?" I changed the subject. "Yes, we're going into the city," he told me. It took us almost an hour to drive into the nearest city. There was a small town that was next to the Pact land, but it only had the basics of restaurants and shops. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Everyone in that town believed that Layton owned a gated community, and they all had their own ideas of what went on inside the exclusive community. However, Layton had things to do, so we needed to go into the city. Halfway through the journey, Layton swore aggressively, making me jump. Angrily, he hit the steering wheel and let out a growl. "What?" I worried, having no idea what caused his sudden fit of rage. "Protection," he growled out. I gave him a look of confusion. "We didn't use protection this morning. I could have gotten you pregnant. This isn't good, not good at all." He shook his head furiously, hands gripping the wheel forcefully. "Is that a big problem? I thought you wanted an heir." I questioned. Every she-wolf was programmed to expect to provide their mates with pups, so I didn't have a problem with Layton wanting pups because I did too, and I knew it would happen when I met my mate. I was prepared. "I do want an heir, but we need to wait a month," he explained. "We have to wait a month." "Why? Does it matter?" My question didn't go down well. He slammed his hands on the wheel. "Of course it fucking matters, Gemini. We have to stick to the plan. Everything has to happen according to the plan." "What plan?" I was nervous, but I wanted to know. "Our life plan. We need to stick to it. I made it and you have to stick to it. There is no choice on the matter." His eyes were like daggers stabbing my body. He was angry, and suddenly all my mother's words came flooding back to me. I suddenly didn't want to go into the city with Layton. I just wanted to go home. Chapter 12. After we'd arrived in the city, and Layton had parked the car, he turned to me with a small smile of apology. "I didn't mean to snap at you, Gemini, you know that," he said to me. I did know that. Despite Layton's temperament, he did care about me. I knew that, and I couldn't overlook it. He just had an awful temper and dominance. I know I smiled shyly, but I still don't understand. There was a still moment between us, before Layton sighed heavily and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I didn't have a good childhood, Gemini. It was horrible and awful, and something I don't ever want to think about again." Layton paused, a soft growl slipping through his lips. He was angry, but more than anything he was hurt. I saw it in his eyes, even if he would never admit it, which I knew he wasn't. I reached over and took his hand. It was a bold move on my part, but after mating with Layton I felt a lot more comfortable touching him. It was odd, but just the day before I would have never done something so bold. Layton gave me a small look, before lifting my hand to his lips and placing a soft kiss on it. "So, I just want to make everything perfect, and to do that we have to stick to the plan." He gave me a soft look. "Please say you understand." "I get it," I replied, even though I didn't. "Good," he nodded, before he leant over and pressed a kiss to my lips. I smiled into the kiss, our lips meeting in a passionate way. It was nice to kiss Layton. It felt so normal for me, like a second nature. He cupped me cheek before deepening the kiss. When we pulled apart, Layton smiled at me. The full grin I loved. I had seen it 3 times that day, and I still couldn't help but be left breathless. He wasn't only handsome when he smiled, but he also looked younger, in some ways happier, more carefree, almost. "Where are we going?" I asked when we got out the car and he took my hand. "City Council," he replied. "What for?" "Marriage certificate," he shrugged. The prospect of signing my name on a marriage certificate scared me, but I knew it was coming. Marriage inside the werewolf community. Marriage wasn't important. It was a human tradition, but we had to do it for legal reasons. It meant very little to wolves, but it had to be done. "We need it so I can change my will, insurances and such," he said. I nodded yes. "Will I take your name?" I already had been made a veterinarian when I was chosen, but marriage would make it legal. Of course, Layton scoffed. as if it were the most ridiculous thing in the world. I smiled at him before letting him pull me to his side. Automatically, I leant into his side. It didn't take us long to sign the marriage certificate, and I didn't feel any different afterwards. We sat in front of a registered minister, just a man in a suit who sat behind a desk. There was no vow exchanging, nor any loving moments. It was simple signing of documents. It was hardly the wedding every girl dreamt of. I never dreamt of one, but it was different to how I imagined. Here, Layton said. Once we left city council and sat in an expensive restaurant for something to eat. He handed me a gold wedding band to show I belonged to him. He slipped one onto his own martial finger, as I pushed mine on. Fitted perfect. He lifted my hand to his lips once more and kissed the ring. As we ate, I made sure to drink only a small amount of the wine after my last encounter with the liquor. I ordered a pasta, while Layton had a bloody steak. There was a comfortable, calm silence between us, both of us eating and occasionally sharing a smile. What's the plan? I blurted suddenly. Layton paused in his eating. What do you have planned? Layton looked at me for a moment before answering. The first step in my plan was find the perfect mate. I've done that. Second part is a pup after a month of being with my mate. Then thirdly, raise the pup with my mate. And when our eldest pup turns 18, I will retire as alpha. I listened to his plan quietly, taking it in. You're assuming we'll have a male pup. I knew that Layton had old-fashioned ideals, so would only allow a male as a future alpha. Shockingly, I agreed with him. Maybe it was sexist of me, but I believed an alpha should be male and the alpha female should simply support. If our pup is a girl, then we'll keep having pups until we get a boy. Layton shrugged. I pouted slightly as I thought over everything. Some things you can't control, Layton. Life is like the weather, it can be predicted, but it doesn't mean it's going to pan out that way. I offered him a smile, before taking his hand over the table. One day you'll realize that it's okay not to be perfect. Sometimes imperfection is better than perfection. The following week I spent with Layton went by quickly. Every day he would work throughout the day, before coming home and spending his evenings with me. We got into a comfortable routine: dinner, TV, cuddle, and then sometimes have sex. It was a nice routine, very mundane and comfortable. Almost too mundane and comfortable. Layton, I'm bored, I blurted out a week later as we cuddled on the couch. It was late evening, almost night. Layton pulled away from our embrace for a second to look at me. Bored of what? He asked, suspicion laced in his tone. During the days. It's boring here, lonely. I want to do something, I told him. Layton looked at me closely, as if he had just remembered I was there. I suspected that he didn't really think about the fact that I was bored and alone during the day. It just wasn't something that would cross his mind. What do you want? He finally questioned. You know the attic? I asked and he nodded. Can I turn it into a library? I was hoping you'd take me into the local town and I can buy some paint and other things. I want to build the library up as we get older. Layton nodded slowly before smiling slightly. It'll need a good clean up there, it's full of crap. But if you want to, you can do it up. Thank you, I just need a project to entertain me. All right, Layton smiled, leaning down and pressing his lips to mine. We kissed for a few minutes, a long, passionate kiss. When we pulled away, I was slightly breathless. Let's go to bed, I want to enjoy you tonight. He kissed me once more, before carrying me up to bed and making love to me for the majority of the night. The following day, Layton took me to the city for lunch and helped me carry my shopping. I was excited to start my project, it would give me something to do. I brought paint, a DIY bookshelf and some furniture. Layton was more than happy to pay for everything. You're really excited for this, aren't you? He chuckled slightly, as we filled one of the spare bedrooms with the items. I love this house, Layton, I really do, I told him truthfully. But the house is too much like a show home. I want to give it the personal touch. I'll start with the attic, and hopefully redecorate a few other parts of the house. It's a house at the moment and I just want to make it a home. Whatever you want, I'll support you, he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of my head as he walked past me. I've got to get back to work, I'll see you tonight. He left me alone. As soon as Layton was gone, I turned away and headed up the stairs. When I reached the attic, I slowly walked up the rickety stairs. The wood groaned and the dust raised slightly. I would need to do a large clean before I could even consider redecorated. But first I needed to move everything out the attic. I eased the door open, and the dark surrounded me. I held the door open with one hand. As I reached over to flick the light on, nothing happened. I sighed, realizing the bulb must have died years back. I had to open the windows to allow light in. The room was long and thin, with wooden planks covering the floor. Boxes, old furniture, and other miscellaneous was scattered around. A layer of thick dust covered every surface and crevice, nothing left untouched with the dirt. Sighing heavily, I got to work. I sorted through boxes, 3 of them full of old clothing and book. I took the clothing down to the garage, planning to give it to charity later before I put the books to one side, knowing their rustic looks would fit well in the library once it was done. When I came to the 4th box, I was shocked at what was inside. At the top of the box sat a picture of Layton at the beach. He couldn't have been older than 5. His dark hair was messed all over the place, his green eyes sparkling and his mouth stretched into a large grin. The young Layton wore a pair of swimming trunks, with his feet being covered by the surf. He looked a lot happier than the Layton I knew, so youthful and innocent. I wondered what had happened to Layton to turn him from such a content little boy to a serious and dominant man. The photo was inside a brass frame, which was darker from dirt. I liked the photo and wanted to put it out, so I took it down to the kitchen and used soap to clean it up some. When it was spotless and shining, I placed it on one of the kitchen windowsills. I smiled as I looked at it. It was nice there. I didn't have time to go through much else in the attic, because Layton returned and I began to make dinner. "Good day?" I asked as I chopped the vegetables. "It was all right," Layton replied, coming up behind me. His large arms wrapped around my waist as he embraced me from behind. He pressed a hard kiss against my nape as I cooked. How was your afternoon?" "Not bad, cleared a bit of the attic. But I have a while to go yet," I admitted, as I pushed the vegetables into the pan. Layton didn't reply. He just tightened his grip on me and buried his face into my neck. "I'm going for a shower," he said a few still seconds later. Quickly, he kissed my neck before pulling away and heading upstairs. I carried on cooking dinner, and by the time he returned it was ready. We spoke little as we ate at the kitchen table, but the silence between Layton and I were never awkward. Halfway through eating, Layton paused, fork slowly lowering back to his plate, with his food still on it. "What?" I asked, worried. "Why is that picture there?" Layton growled, nodding towards the picture of him I'd found in the attic. His jaw was set in anger, and his teeth were gritted. "It's a lovely picture of you, Layton. Give me one reason why it can't be up." "Because it's a different person from a different life," he snapped at me. I flinched slightly at his aggression, but it didn't affect me as much as his anger used to. I was becoming desensitized to his fiery ways. "It's a beautiful picture, Layton. Whether you like it or not, it's staying there," I replied. Layton looked at me in shock, because of the confident way I spoke to him. I just shrugged it off. "You were happy with me personalizing the house, and this is how I want to do it. By making it our home." Layton was about to say something else, no doubt to argue back, but a pounding knock on the front door silenced him. We exchanged confused looks before getting up and leaving our meal. The aggressive knocking continued fast until Layton ripped the door open. He was angry at being interrupted, but he didn't growl or shout when he saw who it was. Beta Strider stood at our front door, eyes wild and breath labored. He looked like he'd just run a marathon. "Jesus, Anthony, what's the problem?" Layton asked, shocked just as much as me. "We got trouble, Alpha," he breathed out through deep exhales. "Susie, Jeff's wife, just found a body at the edge of our territory," he said. My heart rate picked up in fear someone had died, and that terrified me. I had heard that Brody killed people, lone wolves without packs or traitors to his pack. But I had never been associated to death or anything to do with murder. It was as foreign as another language. "Is it one of our pack?" Layton demanded, "or a lone wolf?" Beta Strider paused, swallowing deeply before answering. "Neither, Alpha. We have a dead human on our land." Chapter 13. Humans died all the times. Humans were murdered all the time. Humans killed all the time. However, having a dead human on our territory was bad news. That would mean police over our land, and people snooping into our business. We didn't need that. We really didn't need that. Humans already thought the communities we had were weird, thinking we were a cult or a religious organization, and some even thinking we were nudists. It was the same with every werewolf communal in the country. The humans frowned upon our communities as if we were doing something wrong. People feared the unknown. Layton froze, eyes hardening as he looked at his beta. I swallowed deeply, scared of what it would mean for the Pact to be stuck in the middle of a murder investigation. I gripped a hold of Layton's large hand, holding it tightly with both my thin hands. Layton glanced down at me, before taking me into his arms. He rested me against his side, his arms going around my waist. He held me in a possessive manner, fingers digging into my waist slightly. He was hurting me slightly, but I didn't complain. Take me there. Now, Layton growled. Beta Strider nodded, before leading us towards the forest. I didn't want to go with them to see the dead body, but I also didn't want to leave Layton. Firstly, because I was too scared to be by myself. Secondly, because I didn't want Layton to lose his temper. I had a calming effect on him. We already had one dead body, we didn't him to add any more. On the edge of the territory, about a meter into the woods, was a gathering of a few people from the pack. Go home all of you, I will sort this, Layton exclaimed loudly, as we walked towards where they were huddled. Our pack members all turned to see us, before casting their eyes in submission and returning to their homes. When the wolves were all out of the way, I saw what everyone had been looking at. The dead human. It was a young girl, not much older than me, with light blonde hair and a slim build. Her body was sprawled out over the forest ground, her arms crossed over her body and her legs spread apart. Dirt was matted into her hair, and sprayed all over her body. Her pale skin looked blue. But the worst part was the blood. Scarlet blood was everywhere over the girl, around the girl and on the ground. The smell of copper filled my senses and played on my gag reflex. I gagged, turning away from the sight. Layton didn't say anything, he simply rubbed my back. He was trying to be soothing. But the aggression in the action was anything but. What are we going to do, Alpha? Beta Strider questioned, and I tried to think of anything but the dead body. I'm thinking, Layton snapped, before staring back at the body. Layton was used to death and blood, but I wasn't. Killing wasn't an everyday activity for werewolves, but it happened. Layton was familiar with it, whereas I wasn't. Most wolves wouldn't have ever seen a dead body, yet it didn't even faze Layton. Swallowing deeply, I tried to take in a breath of fresh air. It didn't work and I ended up breathing in more of the death-smelling air. I could no longer hold my dinner down. I broke away from Layton and vomited. I coughed heavily as bile spilled from my mouth. Layton came up from behind me and held my hair back as I doubled over. A human probably wouldn't have been able to smell much, maybe an odd tinge to the air. But, with my senses, it was the smell that turned my stomach contents. I just hadn't expected a dead body to be so dead. It was stupid and naive of me to hope that the girl would have just been sleeping. The smell was too pungent for that. It was like I was suffocating in death. When I'd finished throwing up, I stood back up. Layton glanced at me, looking unsympathetic, and let go of my hair. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. Finished? He asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded, blushing. Good. He turned back to Beta Strider. What should we do? Beta Strider asked. Layton paused. We have to call the police, Alpha. The person who killed her obviously was in a half shift, so it looks like an animal attack. Layton thought about that for a moment before sighing. We'll have cops swarming over the territory for days. The pack will hate that. He ran a hand over his face. I looked up at him, not wanting to look at the dead girl. Layton seemed to have aged significantly since dinner. Frown lines deepened on his forehead. But if we don't, and the girl gets reported missing, the cops will examine all the woodland areas anyway. And that will take longer. And with the full moon coming up, we can't afford for that, Beta Strider argued. Layton cussed angrily. He growled and cussed and raged. He scared me when he was like that, so aggressive and dominate. I wanted to cower at his feet or return home, but I just didn't want to be with Layton right then. He was scaring me, terrifying me. Fine, call the fucking cops, Layton snapped angrily, turning around and throwing his hands up into the air. Gemini, come, he growled, not even looking at me. I obeyed without argument, rushing to his side. He put his arms around me, gripped me in a tight grip. He still didn't even look at me, and I kept my eyes cast to the floor, slightly because of Layton's dominance, but mostly because I didn't want to see the dead girl again. Beta Strider took his phone from his pocket and dialed. I gulped deeply as he held the phone to his ear, the dialing tone filling the silence of the evening. Then, someone spoke and Beta Strider explained how he had found a body, who had been attacked by an animal, possibly a bear. What's a half shift? I asked Layton. He finally turned to me, before gripping my chin and jerking my head up so our eyes met. I thought we were past you submitting to me. He growled angrily. I knew that he wasn't angry at me but at the situation, so I didn't take his anger to heart, but it didn't mean it didn't hurt. I wasn't submitting, I didn't want to see her, I replied honestly, my voice barely a whisper. Layton looked at me strangely, before shaking his head. Sorry, I didn't think that it would bother you so much, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. He pulled me close and hugged me. He kissed the top of my head, a soft, soothing peck. I leant into him, my face resting on his chest. What's a half shift? I questioned once more, glancing up into Layton's green eyes. A half shift is when wolves, strong ones, have the ability to change when it's not a full moon. However, it's not a full form shift. It is just certain part of the body that change, he explained. I nodded, shocked. I had never heard of it before. But then, I didn't know any strong wolves before I met Layton. I shouldn't have brought you out here, Layton mumbled, sighing heavily. It was selfish of me. I knew you would calm me down if I brought you along. But I shouldn't have been so selfish to only think of myself. He pressed another soft kiss to my head. Go home, I'll wait for the police. No, I shook my head, I want to stay with you. I clung onto his shirt, my fingers gripping the material hard. Layton just nodded, and we stood together. She should leave, a voice said from behind us. I turned my head slightly, seeing Beta Strider glaring at the two of us. She is weak and we don't need her spilling all our secrets if the police question her. He narrowed his eyes in my direction, and I blushed in embarrassment and shifted uncomfortably. Layton let out a menacing growl at his Beta. You watch your mouth, Anthony, or I'll rip your tongue from your mouth so you can never speak bad about your alpha female again. His words were delivered with fury and a terrifying murderous stare. I gulped, glad I wasn't on the end of the glare. I would have crumbled at his feet. I'm just saying that. Well, don't just say, Layton cut him off, a growl ripping through his chest as his arms tightened around me. Frankly, Anthony, I don't give a shit what you think. I am the alpha. I am in charge. I decide what happens. So shut up before I make you. Layton pushed me behind him, before stepping towards Beta Strider. The man must have had a death wish, because he stood up to Layton, challenging his alpha. Total and utter disrespect. Layton roared. It wasn't a growl, it was the roar of a beast. I whimpered in fear as Layton grabbed a hold of Beta Strider's collar. How dare you? Layton yelled, his voice more animal than I thought possible. Layton's face twitched, his face morphing slightly. I was seeing a man in half shift. Layton's face distorted, his mouth and nose growing longer and his teeth enlarging. Claws extended from his fingers and his normal hair spread lower over his neck. His eyes grew, his pupils taking over the iris so that the entire eye was black. The plush green meadow color that I had grown to adore were gone. Black eyes left in its place the eyes of a killer. I screamed, clasping my hand over my mouth to muffle the sound slightly. I had never been so fearful for my life before. I stumbled back as tears sprung to my eyes. He was a monster, Layton was a monster. I knew what he was and I was still terrified of him. I couldn't imagine how scared the human would have been to see a beast like that. Layton in his beast form wrapped a clawed hand around Beta Strider's neck. He looked up at my mate with terrified eyes, looking like he was staring down the barrel of the gun, but it was worse than that. I may have been scared stiff, but I still knew that it was Layton inside. And I knew he didn't really want to kill his Beta. So on shaky legs I moved forward and called to him. Layton. Layton. Layton, stop this please. We already have one dead body. Let's not make it two, I yelled, voice cracking with tears. Layton froze, his back becoming rigid at hearing my voice. I carried on, Layton, the police are on their way. We don't need to draw suspicion to ourselves. They need to think that it was an animal attack that killed the girl. We don't need another dead body to make it a murder investigation. There was a heavy pause. Layton, please. I was getting desperate. There was a thick, heavy moment of tension, both Beta Strider and I watching Layton, awaiting his decision. I gulped deeply as Layton glared at Beta Strider, before finally he let go of his neck. The Beta took in a deep breath of air, before rubbing his neck. the skin covered in slight blood from where Layton's claws had punctured the tissue. "You should leave," Layton growled at him. "Because I might kill you if you keep talking. And you're bleeding and we don't need the cops sticking their noses in." His words still held a fierce growl in them. "Understood," Alpha Beta Strider grumbled, eyes cast to the floor and a scowl presenting on his lips. He didn't look happy but turned and left anyway. Layton turned slowly to face me. He was breathing deeply and his hands shook slightly in rage. When his black, bottomless eyes met mine, I visually shivered. "You're scared of me," he said. His voice sounded even and calm, but there was a gruff tone to it due to the half-shift. I gulped but shook my head no. "Yes you are, Gemini. Don't lie to me, you're scared of me. Because I'm a monster." "You're not," I exclaimed louder than necessary. I rushed up to him, scared inside but trying to appear fearless. "You are not a monster, Layton." He laughed humorlessly, shaking his head. "That's exactly what I am, Gemini. I'm a monster and you're an angel." The conversation soon ended by the sound of sirens. Layton took a deep breath. Before returning to the beautiful Alpha I knew, he took me into his arms. We came out on a romantic walk. We stumbled across the body. "We didn't hear anything, we didn't see anything," Layton whispered into my ear. I nodded my understanding. The police worked quickly, taking Layton and I aside, closing up the area and taking the body away to the morgue. The entire time, Layton and I stayed close together, his arms wrapped tightly around my body. It was getting late, and I shivered slightly. "Mr. Vetteriano," a police officer, Sergeant Harris, walked over to us. "I believe you own this land, yes?" he asked. Sergeant Harris was a small man, with arms that were larger than looked real and a face whiter than his hair. "Yes, my wife and I own this entire 50 acres, Layton replied in a clipped tone, showing that the question was unwelcome. At the word wife, Sergeant Harris turned to me, raising an eyebrow in surprise. "You're very young to be married," he commented, eyes looking at me. "And we've all heard of Mr. Vetteriano and his community, but I've never heard of a wife." He spoke as if I were guilty of something. I flushed slightly. "It's a recent marriage," I replied, trying my hardest to sound casual. But I was scared. Humans, especially ones that pried, unnerved me. They were anomalies to me, something different and unique. I only ever interacted with humans when I had to, at restaurants, in the bank, and other mundane things. But I stuck with my own kind. I stuck with wolves. "How recent?" the sergeant asked. "About a week and a half," I stated blankly, and the police officer looked intrigued. "Wow, so I guess finding a dead body on your honeymoon is a bit of a shock. Mrs. Vetteriano, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly were you and your husband doing out here in the middle of the woods?" "We were having a walk together. It's our land, we can walk on it if we want." I didn't mean to sound so snappy, but my fear was forcing me to sound more aggressive than I meant it to. Layton squeezed my hip, a warning, I realized. Sergeant Harris paused, staring me down with beady eyes. "We'd like you both to come down to the station with us and ask you some questions," he finally said. "We've already told you what happened. We went on a walk and we found the body. What more could you need to know?" Layton demanded, his lips tipping into a disapproving frown. The sergeant smiled humorlessly at Layton. "You and your wife need to give your statement," is all. He shrugged. "No need to get so defensive." He paused, looking closely at the two of us. "I mean, not if you don't have anything to hide, that is." "We don't," Layton said through gritted teeth. "Good, because I intend to find out exactly what happened." Chapter 14. The officers took Layton and I into separate rooms. Layton didn't like that and started to shout and cuss. I held his hand and willed him to calm down. He didn't want to at first, but eventually allowed for the officers to separate us, although he strongly showed his dislike of the situation. "If they start asking intrusive questions, then—" "I know what to say, Layton," I whispered, cutting him off. He was holding me tight in his arms, a possessive hold to his broad chest. Layton half smiled, but only for a second before his furious look returned. He really didn't like that I was going into a room with two humans, males at that, without him. I was just going to say, "If they start acting suspicious, don't answer and demand a lawyer." He raised his hand and cupped my cheek. "I don't want to leave you," he whispered thickly, before bending down and kissing my lips. "Mrs. Vetteriano, we really need to get started," a police officer interrupted us. Layton glowered and pulled away from me. "Sure," I said and stepped towards him. Slowly, looking pained, Layton let go of me and I followed the officer. He took me to a dingy, dark questioning room. There was a scratched wooden desk in the center, with a one-way mirror on the left side of the room. 2 men sat behind the desk. One was Sergeant Harry's and the other was a tall man with red hair, Detective Smith. Both had unreadable expression. They read a few things for the benefit of the recording tape before they began the questioning. It started out with simple questions about how we found the body, did we know the girl, had we had wild animals on our land before. All the things I answered perfectly. Then came the harder questions. So you and Mr. Vetteriano own the land, yes? Sergeant Harry's asked. Yes, I replied. And you have people that live on the land with you, is that correct? Yes. Who are they to you? Family. So you have an awfully big family. His questions were unnerving me. I hated people prying. But I took a big breath and smiled slightly. I wanted to cry and hide, or run out the room and find Layton. But I couldn't. I had to be the alpha female that Layton wanted me to be. They are friends, some family, but mostly friends. I smiled. I'm sorry, officer, but I don't see what this has to do with the death of that poor girl. I'm just trying to get the full picture here, Mrs. Vetteriano. He gave me an over-exaggerated grin. It set me on edge. It was a sly smile, almost fox-like. Now, how did you and Mr. Vetteriano meet? We have mutual friends. We met at a gathering of sorts. Does your husband run a cult? Detective Smith blurted out. I turned to him, eyes wide and shocked. I couldn't believe that he had outright asked me that. A lot of humans thought that the wolf pack communities were cults, but I hadn't expected for him to ask me straight out. What? Of course not, I gasped, surprised. We've been watching your husband for a while now. We've seen the way he is with you. How he is with his people and with women. Does he hurt you? Does Mr. Vetteriano beat you, Gemini? Can I call you Gemini? No. It's Mrs. Vetteriano, I stated. I was angry that he could suggest that Layton could ever hurt me or hurt women. Layton wanted to protect women. He treated women with the utmost respect. All right, Mrs. Vetteriano. Sergeant Harry's and I have been watching your husband for the past year or so. And we've seen the secretive way how the other people bow down to him as if he is their leader. Not to mention how the simple idea of you speaking to a male without him. I would suggest you stop talking about my husband in such a way, detective. I was on the verge of growling in an animalistic way. I was scared, upset, and angry. It was a bad combination for a werewolf. When our emotions got too much, we exploded violently. I was a naturally calm person. Only 2 times had I gotten to the point of explosion. More dominate wolves like Layton reached the explosion level weakly. It always got ugly when our emotions got that high. We were a danger to ourselves and others when we get to that stage. So I took a deep breath and focused on calming myself. I didn't mean to upset you, Mrs. Vetteriano. I just wanted you to understand that if your husband were to hurt you, we could offer you safety. All you'd have to do is testify that he is administrating a cult and, we are not a cult, I told them calmly. Please stop insulting me, my husband and my community. My husband would never lay a finger on a woman, and people respect him for looking after everyone. Is it a crime to be respected? We are peaceful people who just happen to live in a close, gated community. And if you don't like that, then I'm sorry, but it really has nothing to do with you. I was proud of how confident I sounded. Mrs. Vetteriano, like I said earlier, we have been monitoring the activities of your community. And we know that you were taken from your home in another community similar to this one, and within a few weeks you were married to Mr. Vetteriano. What are you suggesting, Detective Smith? I asked, fisting my hands on my laps as I tried to control my emotions. If you were given to Mr. Vetteriano as a gift to a leader or for money, then we can get you out of this. You're a very attractive girl, you have many options. You think Layton bought me? I screeched. I was outraged and hurt. I stood up, carelessly pushing my seat aside so it hit the floor. Hot tears sprung to my eyes and spilled out my eyes and ran down my cheek. I choked on a sob as I shook my head in disgust. How dare you? How dare you say such things about me, about my husband and about my community? Gemini. Sergeant Harry sighed heavily. Please understand that. It's Mrs. Vetteriano to you, I snapped, shocked with my own anger. I am disgusted that you have spoken to me in such a way. You either get me a lawyer right now or you let me go. Because I am done answering your questions. I am married to Layton for love. And you suggesting anything else is a disgrace. I was still crying, as I turned on my heel and stormed out the questioning room. Detective Smith nor Sergeant Harris followed or called me back. Layton was in the waiting room, and as soon as I saw him his jaw set in anger. I rushed into his arms clinging to his shirt. Gemini, what's wrong? What did they do to you? I swear to God if they touched you. He let out a menacing growl gripping hold of me tightly. They started asking whether we were running a cult, and then if you'd paid for me as if I was some kind of prostitute and… They did what? Layton yelled at the top of his voice. Everyone in the room froze at the sound of his anger. He was like a volcano ready to explode at any moment. Layton took a deep, calming breath before pulling his phone out his pocket. He dialed a number before placing it to his ear. Arlene, come to the police station. I want you to pick up Gemini and take her home. Come as soon as possible. He promptly hung up the phone before turning to me. He hugged me close to his chest, swaying slightly as I sniffed and tried to contain my sobs. Mr. Vetteriano, a voice that of Sergeant Harris called out, as he came into the waiting room. How dare you suggest such things about my wife? Layton growled, hands tightening around me. I understand that you are unhappy about certain things, Mr. Vetteriano, but I can assure. We will discuss this once my wife has left. Layton growled, his voice thick and threatening. Right now I suggest you keep your mouth shut and get your captain on the phone, because I have a lot of things to discuss with him. Sergeant Harris didn't reply, and soon Arlene arrived. She drove me home, but we made little conversation as to we did so. Thank you, Arlene. I smiled at the pack wolf as the car rolled into the entrance of the territory. I can walk from here. With all due respect, alpha female, you'll stay in the damn car. A killer is on the loose, and I'm not going to let you get yourself ripped apart like that poor girl. Sorry, alpha female, but it's not going to happen. All right, I nodded, chuckling slightly. Arlene reminded me largely of my mother. They were both stubborn and opinionated, but in a caring way. She drove me to my doorstep. Thank you, Arlene. I mean that. You were nice to me when no one else was, and you're loyal to Layton. So thank you. The house was quiet, and our uneaten dinner was cold on the table. I looked at it, thinking about how simple everything seemed mere hours before. Layton and I were in a good place and the pack was safe. But then everything changed. A girl died, a wolf trespassed, and the police got involved. I cleared away the plates before I made myself some pasta. I left a large bowl for Layton and put it in the fridge. I sat at the table alone and thought over everything that had happened since the choosing ceremony. I glanced at the wedding band on my finger and smiled slightly. I never thought I'd be happy with Layton with the blood alpha, but I was. I was happier than I ever thought. I understood him, and I understand why he did the things he did. An hour or so after me, Layton returned home. As soon as I saw him, I rushed up to him. What happened? I demanded. It's sordid, was all he said. I gave him a desperate look, willing him to explain. Leave it alone, Gemini. It is sordid, he warned. He gave me a hard look and I nodded. I thought you'd be hungry, I said, taking his hand and leading him back to the kitchen. He took a seat at the table and I got the pasta out the fridge. Do you want me to warm it? I asked. No, I'll eat it as it is, he replied. I nodded and walked over to him. I placed the food in front of him before I climbed onto his lap. He was surprised by my actions, but smiled at me as I got comfortable leaning into him. One of his arms slipped around my waist to hold me to him, as the other picked up his fork to eat. This is good, Layton commented in between mouthfuls. Well, I thought you'd be hungry, I shrugged, as one of my hands absently minded played the threading on his shirt. Layton, do you agree with the police officer? Do you think that you bought me? Not in the way that you paid, but as in you shopped for me until you found the right mate. I blurted out. No, Layton stated forcefully. You're a prize. You're my reward for waiting to choose a mate. I didn't buy you, I won you. Then, as if my mouth had a mind of its own, I blurted out some dangerous words. Words that I hadn't meant to say, but I meant. Layton, I love you. Chapter 15. There was a moment of pause as Layton swallowed his mouthful and put his fork down. He pushed me away slightly so there was a gap between us. He looked me dead in the eye. His face was as blank as it always was, unreadable. He had the look mastered. What did you say? He asked calmly. His green eyes piercing my face with a look of pure concentration. I swallowed deeply, hoping I wasn't making a mistake. I love you, I whispered, biting my bottom lip nervously. At my words, Layton's face lit up. I got that gorgeous smile. I loved the one I dreamed about getting. I chuckled slightly relieved before I smiled with him. Tight and almost aggressively, he gripped the back of my head and forced my head towards his. The kiss was hot and passionate, and I felt my entire body lit up at the touch of our lips. Growling slightly, Layton lifted me up and set me down so I was straddling him. Instantly my hands went around his neck, and I deepened the kiss. Layton pulled back slightly, grinning again. Say it again, he growled playfully. I love you, Layton Veturiano, I giggled, and he growled again, snarling in a frisky manner as we kissed again. Our lips battled as our bodies pressed up together, and my hands gripped into his hair. I moaned breathlessly as he picked me up and walked out the kitchen. My lips were Layton's focus, and he was concentrating so much that he tripped slightly and we tumbled onto the couch. I giggled as I fell on top of Layton's and he laughed with me. It was the first time I had heard him laugh. It was a deep husky sound that made me grin brightly. I love you, I said again, and then we were kissing again. Most of the night I spent in Layton's arm, not just making love, but kissing and cuddling. We ended up on the lounge floor with a blanket over us. We didn't get back from the police station until 1 in the morning, so it was close to 5 a.m. when we finally stopped making love. Layton just continued to kiss me and want more. Not that I complained any. Every now and again he would growl at me to say it again. And I would, and we would have sex. When I finally told Layton I was too tired to go again, he groaned in annoyance but understood. It's late, I commented. It's early, he replied, and I chuckled slightly through a yawn. I rested my head on his chest, pulling the couch blanket closer around me. Say it again, he growled. I chuckled as I turned to look up into his eyes. No, because every time I do we end up having sex and I'm exhausted, I chuckled, and Layton smiled softly. He reached up and took a strand of my hair in between his thumb and forefinger. He twirled it softly. Layton, I whispered after a while, and he grunted at me to continue. You haven't said it back to me. That you love me. I frowned slightly, as my mind suddenly became plagued with thoughts of paranoia about his feelings for me. Layton paused, pouted his lips slightly before sighing. I do feel like that towards you, but I can't say it to you. The words are too painful. Maybe one day when I explain my life to you, you will understand why I can't say it. But I do feel those things towards you, but I just can't ever say them out loud. I smiled sadly, not understanding what he meant. But I knew that Layton was a complicated man with a complicated past, so I didn't question it. All right, well, I love you, I grinned, and he growled playfully. I leant down and pecked his lips. I woke up to the feel of being lifted from the lounge floor. And when my eyes opened fully, I found myself on my bed. Layton was standing next to his closet, doing a shirt up. Layton, I whispered, sitting up in the bed. He turned to me and gave me a small smile. You should rest, we had an eventful night, he smirked. He walked over and took a seat next to the bed. You've hardly slept, I commented through a yawn. Come back to bed. I took him hand and pulled it, as I lay back down on the bed. I can't, there are police still on the territory and I need to calm the hysteria, he told me. I'm going to hold a big lunch for the entire pack, I need you to be beside me. So, I'll come back at about 1 and get you, he told me. I nodded and he leaned down and kissed me. Love you, I said as he walked towards the door. Don't, he warned, shouting back, because I'll come back in there and fuck you again and I have to go to work. I could hear the smile in his voice and I giggled slightly as I went back to sleep. An hour or so later, I got up and showered before picking out an outfit. I decided on another dress, knowing that Layton liked it when I wore dresses. I decided on a new dress that Layton had let me buy online a few weeks back. It was a light blue, almost pearl-colored dress which was tight at the top before flaring out at the waist. The stiff pleats had small blue flowers on the bottom, and there was a dark blue bow at the back. I paired it with some small blue kitten heels which Layton's credit card had also bought for me. Decided my hair was always curly, I took a straight iron to it. I smiled at my reflection as I nervously twirled my wedding ring. Thinking of Layton, I smiled goofily to myself, like every other idiot in love. I loved Layton with all of my heart. You look beautiful, Layton said when he returned home dead on 1 o'clock, just like he'd said. Thank you, I smiled, and he pressed a kiss to the top of my head. He then went to change into a clean shirt, before returning to the lounge. Layton walked over to me, before holding out a black jewelry box to me. I gave him a confused look, but it took it. Smiling to myself, I opened it. Inside was a beautiful diamond pendant, roughly the size of a pea, on a slim gold chain with a delicate clasp at the back. I gasped as the diamond caught the light and sent spectrums flying around the room. Layton, it's beautiful. What's the occasion? No occasion, Layton shrugged, acting almost embarrassed. I brought it last week and I was going to give it to you last night. Before all the shit happened. It was going to give to you as a start of our family. Our family? I questioned in confusion. We had sex 11 times last night. And not a single time did I use a condom, Layton stated, and I looked at him in shock. I hadn't even noticed. I had been too blinded by the passion and love to even notice. We're going to start trying for a baby, Gemini. So this is a gift to signify the beginning of our family. I smiled softly, both nervous and happy, before taking the necklace out the box. Layton helped me fasten it, and I glanced in the mirror with a smile. It sat perfectly on my neck, the diamond dangling against my pale skin. Thank you, Layton, it is beautiful, I smiled and kissed him softly. We need to have sex as much as possible from now on, Layton said, smiling slightly. I giggled at his joy as he wrapped me up in his arms. He grinned down at me before placing a kiss on my forehead. I'm talking like every morning and every night. You don't seem very sad about that, I laughed. Oh, I'm devastated, he smirked, kissing my lips briefly. Now we really should get going. He placed his hand on the lower of my back and led me out the house. Outside, as we walked down to the Pact village, I took a hold of his hands. Are the police still here? I asked after a minute or so. Yeah. They have been investigating the area for the entire night and most of the morning. It's ridiculous they're going to do all this work to find out it was in fact an animal attack. They're wasting money on something I've already told them. You lied, I commented. I stretched the truth, he shrugged, waving my words away with a flick of his wrist. I chuckled slightly, as we made our way into the restaurant where Layton told the entire pack to meet the same place that all the she-wolves met the last time. The entire restaurant was buzzing with noise, and people filled the entire room. All the seats were taken par two and everyone else was either perching on the tables or standing around. The 2 seats left at the head of the restaurant were for Layton and I. We took a seat on them and the room felt quiet. Layton addressed the pack, speaking of the girl, the police investigation and the importance of staying covert while we have humans in our midst. Layton's powerful voice rung out loudly in the crowded room, such influence and authority in the room that no one dared to talk, cough, sneeze or even breathe too louder. Hopefully, Layton continued, the police will be gone for the full moon. If not, I have been in contact with Alpha Jones of the Greasall Pack, and is happy for us to travel up there for the full moon. They were happy to accommodate for all of us. So, if by Monday the police are still here, we will head down there. That was a shock for me to find out that Layton had arranged for us to travel back up to my old pack. I would see my mother, and my sister and Jacob again. I was both excited and nervous about that. I wanted to see my mother, but her words about not wanting to speak to me rang loud in my mind. Now that concludes the meeting. Please everyone, Daniel is setting up a barbecue out back. All of you have something to eat and drink, and we'll have another meeting on Monday morning at 9 a.m. to discuss if we're going to have to relocate for the full moon. The chatter became loud again, before everyone began to filter out the restaurant and to the back. There is a chance I could go home. I asked Layton, shocked he hadn't said something beforehand. This is your home, Gemini. It gets me mad when you say shit like that, Layton snapped, glowering at me in displeasure of my words. Sorry. I didn't mean it like that. I took his hand and gave it a squeeze. He glanced down at our conjoined hands before raising them to his lips to kiss. You know I like living here, Layton. I love you, Layton, and I love living here. You do know that, right? I do, he nodded. I know. And even if you didn't like living here, I wouldn't let you leave. You belong to me now, you're mine. I frowned slightly. I'm not a possession, Layton, I'm a person. It was odd how comfortable I had become with saying my mind to Layton. I knew he may get angry, but he cared too much to be angry for long. I know you're a person, Layton stated, but you're still my person. You belong to me just as I belong to you. That's how this works, Gemini. Don't overcomplicate things by thinking deeply into what I say. You love me, I feel the same. Stop thinking like that. He was irritated with me, so spoke through gritted teeth. All right. I was just saying, I shrugged slightly before smiling up at him. I kissed his lips softly before pulling away. Come on, let's go get something to eat. Don't let the story end. Subscribe to continue our wolf pack legend.